Well, hi everyone. I was asked to do this video on how to make bread, and we were going to do this um, in person as an activity, but we decided with everything the way it is that doing it on a video would actually work pretty good. Maybe this way you can just watch it whenever it's convenient for you, and you can start and stop it or whatever you want. So there are like thousands of bread making videos online. So what would be a reason why we might make another bread making video for you? So this video is going to show about how to make bread with food storage ingredients, just food storage ingredients. And also, it's by the girl that you can call and ask questions to. Anytime you're in the middle of making bread and you have a question, just give me a call and I just would love to help you. So, there's actually probably thousands of ways to even make bread. This is just one way. I mean, you could make bread with just flour and water. It wouldn't be much more than a pancake, but you could do that. And so I am going to show you a way that has a lot of different ingredients in it, and I'm going to show you why I use them. But just keep in mind that bread can be bread without all of these different ingredients. So first I'm gonna just kind of tell you about the ingredients that I use and why I use them. So let me back up just one second. The kind of bread that I'm gonna be making today is a kind that you would use for like sandwiches or something like that, rather than like a French bread or that kind of thing. So that's our goal, is to make just a regular, kind of like a store-bought loaf of bread. So this is the kind of yeast that I use, and this is also the kind of yeast that we are currently putting that order together for the ward. This kind of yeast is really great because it's cheaper when you buy it in a big block like this, as opposed to the traditional little envelopes. And it also is not particular about whether you put it in with the dry ingredients or whether you make a sponge out of it first, like you may have heard. This kind of yeast is so great because it will work in any of those kind of applications. So, another thing about this kind of yeast that is great is it will store forever, pretty much. It's in this vacuum packed package, and I keep it in my freezer, even though you technically wouldn't even need to keep it in your freezer. But I just keep it in there just to make sure that it is extra safe. I bought a case of this yeast over 10 years ago. I don't even know how long ago it was. And I just used my last package of this yeast. It was that old. And it's been in my freezer this entire time. And the package that I just opened that was that old is perfectly good. So that's the kind of yeast that I really like. Then I'm going to use honey. You can see this honey looks really dark. Any kind of honey or sugar will work just fine in this recipe. This is melted bacon drippings. So I'm going to use this in my bread today. It adds some great flavor, but you could use just regular canola oil or any kind of oil in your recipe. I also use, this is non-instant dry milk that I bought from the dry pack. So I use this in the recipe just as a way of adding more protein to the bread and making it more nutritious. So this is totally optional. You don't have to use this, but it does add protein, and it also adds a softness to the bread that is nice. So I also use this. These are potato flakes, also from the dry pack. This just is a totally optional ingredient that just adds flavor. If you can just think of those delicious potato rolls that we all love, that I just put some potato flakes in as part of the dry ingredients to add flavor. It's gonna need salt, and then these two things. This is powdered lecithin, and this is also an optional ingredient, but it really makes a difference if you are making bread with whole wheat. This powdered lecithin is going to help the bread turn out more like store bread. A lot of people, when they first try to make whole wheat bread, they notice that it's dry and crumbly, or it's heavy. And they're just wishing for that kind of light fluffiness of store bread. And this lecithin helps it to turn out that way. So it's optional, but it's a great addition if you can get it. This one also, this is dough enhancer. And this one, it has some whey and some citric acid in it and some gluten. Now, a lot of people, when they hear the word gluten, they feel afraid. But when it comes to bread making, gluten is your friend. And this product helps up the gluten content of our mixture. And that is it will make a huge difference on if the bread turns out light and fluffy. Okay, so the first thing that I do when I'm going to start making bread is I start my wheat grinding. I'm going to make a recipe that has about 2/3 of the dry ingredients are going to be whole wheat flour, and the rest is going to be a mixture of white flour and these other dry ingredients. So right here, this is my hard white wheat. You can use hard red wheat that a lot of people have in their storage, but the hard white wheat has higher gluten content in it. So just like we were talking, it's going to make the bread turn out lighter, fluffier, and have a less intense wheat taste. So it's going to taste more like a store-bought loaf of bread. Okay, so our wheat is all ground now, and if you live near me and you have wheat from your storage that you would like to use but you don't have a mill, I'd be more than happy to grind some wheat for you. So the recipe that I'm going to make makes 5 loaves of bread at a time, and so the recipe starts with 5 cups of water. And that's kind of a rule of thumb, 1 cup per loaf of bread that the recipe would make. And this water is about the same temperature as a nice bath. The warmness of the water helps the yeast to grow. The next thing that I usually put in is the yeast, 3 tablespoons. what I do is I put in the yeast first along with a couple other things and just kind of observe it briefly to make sure that the yeast is alive before I put all the other ingredients in, so that I don't waste all those ingredients in case the yeast isn't active. But I actually haven't ever had the yeast not work, but it's just a habit that I've got. So the next thing that I put in is going to be the oil, or in this case, bacon grease. And I'll show you why. So I put in 3/4 cup or so. Oh, and that's another thing that I was going to mention with bread. Measurements it's not necessary to be exact like it is when you're making a cake or something like that. Everything is just kind of ballpark. So around 3/4 cup of some kind of oil. And I put that in my measuring cup first so that when I measure the honey, which I use the same amount, 3/4 cup or so of honey. If I put it in the same measuring cup as the oil, the honey will slip right out. Look at that. The sweetener, whether you're going to use honey or sugar, is the yeast really likes that. And so adding that at this point in the game is going to help me to know more quickly if the yeast is active. It will feed off just flour, but it seems to like the sugar. So I'm just looking in here, and if you can see in here, you can see there's pockets of just dry yeast sitting on top of the water, and that's it's going to get mixed in. But you can also see that there's places where it's starting to foam, and that is exactly what I want to see. That means that the yeast is alive and starting to work. So I'm going to just get this on a slow mix while I put in some more ingredients. Would you be able to hear me? The next thing that I generally put in is this whole wheat. And one thing that's great is it's coming straight out of my mill, and so this flour is warm. And that is also going to help the yeast grow. You can see that when I'm talking about measurements being not exact, that's exactly what's going on right here. I actually am not sure how much wheat flour I'm putting in right now. I should measure it. I'm going to guess that there's 8 to 10 cups. Next time I make it, I'll measure it and let you know. The order of ingredients is not super important. This is 3 tablespoons of salt, 2 tablespoons of dough enhancer, 3 tablespoons of lecithin powder, about a cup of potato flakes. And about a cup of dry milk powder. That is roughly equivalent to how much milk powder you would add to 5 cups of water. So it's kind of like making that water that we started with the equivalent of starting with milk. So if a person had a lot of milk on hand, they could just use regular liquid milk. So from here, what I do is just add regular white flour until I can see that there's enough flour here, and that's it. What I'm looking for is if this dough has turned smooth and elasticy. It should resemble kind of like chewing gum. And I can see that we're getting there, but that it's not quite all the way. So if any of you guys watch the British baking show, you know they talk about kind of that windowpane thing, where if you stretch the dough out, that you can get it really thin and you can kind of like almost like see through it. And it's starting to do that, but it's kind of still just tearing. So that means that I want to let it knead a little bit longer. Okay, so this has been kneading for about 15 minutes. Every mixer is a little different, and if you were kneading it by hand, then it may take even a little bit longer. But now we've got the consistency of this dough that I'm kind of looking for. It's very elasticy and stretchy, and that is a function of the kneading. It creates these long strings of gluten, and that's what makes it have that stretchiness. So I am looking for dough that is somewhat sticky. The stickier that I can leave this dough and still be able to handle it, the better. That will make the bread turn out fluffier. And having too much flour in the dough is what will make it dry and crumbly. A lot of times when people make homemade bread and they try to slice it for sandwiches, it kind of crumbles or falls apart. And so this is going to help avoid that. So if you have sticky dough, you would do one of two things to be able to handle it. Is you would either use oil or flour on the counters and on your hands. So I want to avoid adding more flour to this dough to keep it as sticky as I can. And so what I did was I sprayed my countertop just with cooking spray, and I sprayed my hands. And so this dough is really nice to work with now. So all I have to do now is get this ready to go in the pans. And that's another great advantage of that SAF yeast, is I don't have to do a complete raise first. I can just let this dough can just rest for just a few minutes, which I've already done, like 5 minutes, and then I can put it straight into the pans, and it can raise in the pans, and that's all it needs. So it really cuts down on your total bread making time. It doesn't need 2 total raises like we traditionally think of, like it having to raise first in the big blob before you put it in the pans. So what I'm going to do is just separate this into 5 equal pieces. And what I do is I just like feel it with my hands to see which one feels bigger. And you can see that this one right here is way smaller. So I'm just gonna go like this, feel it until I feel like they're roughly equal. If you wanted to, you could measure it with a scale, but I'm not going to be that worried about it. Okay, so then here's my bread pans that I'm going to just coat with cooking spray. Now, it's just a quick forming into loaves and stick them in. And what I do is I kind of just am pulling the dough in and rolling it like that. You can watch that one more time or a few more times. You can see how I'm kind of tucking the ends in and just rolling it so it has a nice smooth top. If I'm noticing large air bubbles, I'm trying to work those out as I go. But at this point, there shouldn't be many. Okay, now I can see that this one right here is a little smaller than the rest. And guess what? We don't care. I just cover them with a dish towel just to keep off dust or insects or whatever. And this is going to raise until they're about double in size. And I'll show you how they will look when they are ready. Okay, so our bread has been raising for about 40 minutes, and you can see that it has doubled in the pans. Another way that you can see if it's ready to go is if it is kind of just barely above the level of the pans. This one right here is a little bit overproofed. You can see it's quite a bit over the top of the pans. So these are ready to go in. I preheated the oven to 350 and they are going to bake for 30 minutes. Okay, our bread is done. Here's a great example that you can use when you're baking bread is it doesn't have to be perfect for it to taste great. So if you look at this bread, you can see it's got kind of a deep color. I would have probably liked it to be not this dark, but because it is whole wheat, it should be somewhat dark. I just took it out, so it's super hot, and because it's a little tiny bit overbaked, I'm going to take it out of the pans immediately and let it cool on the racks instead of cooling in the pans for any length of time, because it will still continue to bake in the hot pans. So I'm going to hurry and take these out, and they're super hot. I wanted to just mention that the raising time is very much variable according to how warm the day is, how hot your kitchen is. This bread came up pretty fast compared to what I thought it would do because it's a cloudy day today. Okay. You can let it cool a little bit before you cut it, but don't wait too long because there's nothing better than hot bread. The only reason to wait is because it's easy to smash your bread when it's really hot, when you're cutting it. So you can get away with cutting it if you're very gentle with it and just saw carefully and not press down too much. This bread has literally been out of the oven for only a minute, and so it's very, very hot, and I'm still able to cut it. Now take a peek at the inside. This is kind of what we're shooting for. And now here's one more thing I would like to show you. It's really too hot to do this. But what I wanted to show you is homemade whole wheat bread is often dry and crumbly. And so you wouldn't be able to like do this with it. But this bread has a lot of gluten in it, and it's been kneaded a lot, and so it has that nice light store-like quality to it. And if you were to lift up one of these loaves, you would see that it's quite light, doesn't weigh a lot. So that's everything. I want you guys to feel free to call me if you have any questions. And if you would like to borrow any of my toys, my mill, my mixer, my bread pans, or anything like that, if you want to just borrow them so you can see if this is something you want to get into and then invest in the stuff for yourself. This was so much fun. Thank you.